This happened when I was 19. It was when I went back to my hometown to visit my parents. My parents live in the city, and it can be a bit of a pain in the ass to park at home sometimes. I often end up parking halfway down the street and walking. On the night this experience took place, I parked down the street and a little around the corner. I visited them, had dinner, caught up, and then I said my goodbyes at around 10 p.m., probably a little closer to 10:30. So to get back to my car, I had to head down a street and through an alley. My car was parked just at the end of that alley. I got through the alley fine and back to my car. As I was about to get in my car, I noticed something in the alley. It wasn't dark enough for it to be pitch black out, plus it was summer, so there was still some faint natural light out, even at that time of night. I saw something in the alley which looked to be the shape of a human, and it was heading down the alley towards me and my car. It was almost swaying. It was the strangest thing. Quite eerie, actually. It was twisting and wiggling. It didn't look normal at all. I thought that it was trouble, some kind of weirdo or someone trying to distract me from something. I decided to get in the car quickly and get the hell out. That figure made me feel really uncomfortable. It's so hard to explain, so I just feel like asking a question at this point. Can humans look distorted? It's like he or she was glitching out, like it was a few frames behind real time, real life, or reality. It sort of jiggered, left to right. It was hard to make out because it was dark, but as soon as my eyes noticed that thing in the alley, it was pretty much unmissable. I strained my eyes and I saw it. I saw that thing so clearly. I wish I got out of there sooner than I did. But I was almost hypnotized by that thing. When it reached the end of the alley, it was showered in the light of 2 streetlights. Only then, when it was fully illuminated, was I able to see that thing and what it was. And to be honest, I still have no clue what I saw that night. I'll just try my best to explain it. It was completely pink, like a skin tone. It was like looking at meat. That's all I can really describe it as. It was just some amalgamation of meat crudely shaped as a human. I tell you, when I saw that thing, my spine ran ice cold. It was completely unexplainable. I was overcome with anxiety after seeing it. Even though I could have just as easily gone back to my parents' house, I decided to drive all the way home. It was like I was repelled. I needed to be so far away from it. I knew that just looking at that thing wasn't good. It was innate, like some kind of primal voice inside me told me to just get out of there and fast. Something inside me told me that if I went back to my parents' house and that thing would follow me and get in somehow. I know I sound completely crazy, but that's just how I felt. I had to get far away, so I did. When I drove off, I looked in my rearview mirror and noticed that the thing from the alley wasn't pursuing me. It didn't make me feel any less terrified, though. A few weeks later, I decided to pay my parents another visit. I guess that's because I couldn't get the incident in the alley off of my mind. It was still fresh. I decided to mention my experience to my mother, and I was surprised by her response. "Oh, you saw that down by the alley, right?" I said, "Yeah, that's where I saw it," and I mentioned the person's house I saw it near. You know what? That makes sense, I guess. You've been away for a while, so you haven't heard. The son of the Ishikawa family got hit by a car, and he passed away. It was a head-on collision, hit and run. Sorry to put it in a bad way like this, but maybe that was what you saw. Some kind of manifestation of that poor guy's final moments. I was shocked, but I guess it kind of made sense. My mum has always said to me that she can see things. And whatever she can see, I guess maybe I got something like that from her. We often talk about what we have seen. I don't know if my mother's theory is correct though, but it's the only thing I got. I'll never forget that night. I'm a detective, but not like the ones you see on TV and in the movies. I'm more of a private detective. By that I mean I don't get involved in any murder cases or anything like that. Most people hire me for family affairs. I get a lot of work from investigating cheating accusations, to locate missing or stolen pets, and I am sometimes asked to gather evidence of bullying at schools as well. I had a call one afternoon last summer, and I've told some of my friends about this experience, and they've encouraged me to share it here. It's the strangest and frankly most disgusting case I've ever handled. So I got a call. The client was a woman in her 30s. She made arrangements to meet me in person, to speak to me about her request. I was taken aback by her beauty when I first laid eyes on her. She was a very, very talkative woman. It was as if her tongue was afraid of the dark. She was very warm and open. She had come to ask me to find out if her husband was having an affair. I thought to myself, now, who the hell would want to cheat on you, hey? She had grown suspicious of her husband when he started coming home later and later from work. She guessed that he was meeting up with someone, based on how shifty he had been acting whenever she asked him where he had been. She thought that he had been cheating on her for about a month. I took the job and told her that I would trail him when he finished work. I got his work address and waited in my car until I saw him leave. I was really hoping that this guy was just trying to put in a few extra hours for his wife and potentially their future, but as in most cases in my line of work, I was wrong. The husband left work at about 6 p.m. and his wife told me that he had been coming home no earlier than 10 p.m. So clearly he was up to something in those 4 hours, and I was going to find out what that was. He got in his car and I tailed him. We drove for quite a while. We left the city area and headed out into the suburbs. I thought to myself, he might have met a woman in the city who lived on the outskirts, and to avoid their affair being discovered, he always met her in the outskirts and never in the city. My theory went out of the window when we drove right through the suburbs and into the countryside. Now, this wasn't what I was expecting at all. I was quite surprised at this point. There wasn't really much out where we were heading, nothing but a few houses and a couple of abandoned buildings. He led me to the most unexpected place, an abandoned love hotel. He parked up, and I turned off, not to raise his suspicions. I planned on looping back round to covertly see what he was getting up to. While doing this, I did a search on the abandoned love hotel. Apparently, it went under due to poor management and deaths. Last activities I found online in terms of opening hours were more than 10 years ago. So what the hell was he doing out there? If the hotel was open, then that would be fine, I guess. Love hotels are kind of self-explanatory, you know? You rent a room for a certain period of time, and you get intimate in that room. It's pretty straightforward. The thing about love hotels is that some of them are so out there and unusual, they offer all kinds of fulfillments of fantasies. If you want to do it in a themed room like a medieval Game of Thrones kind of scenario, then there's a hotel for that. This particular hotel was catered to fantasies. I could tell just by some of the reviews I read. It seemed as if nothing was off the table. That said, it was still abandoned, so what was he doing there? I had to pull in and see for myself. I had a job to do. I had to observe and report. I saw his car. He wasn't in it, so I headed into the abandoned love hotel. I cautiously walked into the lobby, trying my best to avoid all the debris on the floor. It didn't take me long to locate which room he was in. I heard strange noises coming from upstairs. A male voice was murmuring, so I followed the sound of those murmurs. I arrived at the room, and I could see and hear what was going on through a gap in the door. The guy had left it ajar, so I peeked inside. What I heard and saw rendered me speechless. Oh, look at you. You're so beautiful. You're so lovely and quiet. Nice and quiet. The husband was speaking to a naked woman who was lying on the dusty bedspread. I looked closer and realized something. Hang on, that's not a woman. That's a love doll. A doll made solely for the fulfillment of pleasures. The husband began to take off his suit jacket and started loosening his tie. I was almost certain what was about to come next. I couldn't bear watching that. I was very confused and conflicted. I had to report this to the client, and I knew that it was going to be very difficult and likely distressing for the wife. Her reaction and her feelings towards what happened will remain confidential. All I will say is that my predictions were right. It was incredibly distressing. I don't know anything about how he explained himself or what motive was behind him doing that, but I have thought about it. I thought that he must have brought that doll to the abandoned love hotel so that he could enjoy himself in peace. When I told one of my friends this story, she's into creepy online stories, so you can thank her for me sharing this with you. When I told her about this, she said the following: "Are you sure the husband wasn't being called to the abandoned hotel by the doll?" Well, there's a creepy thought, hey? This happened when I was 26 years old. I was working at a pretty big company. I thought that I had it made, you know? I had just graduated from university, and I had landed a really decent job. I quickly realized that not everything was as it seemed. I tried to stick it out, but man, I hated that job. They took advantage of me. Every holiday request I put in was denied, and the hours were way longer than advertised. I saw no progression there, and everyone was horrible. I was exhausted and underappreciated, so I quit. I had to get another job, and pretty quick too, if I wanted to afford rent. I took a temp job in sales. It wasn't as stressful, and it wasn't as respected, but I finally achieved a nice kind of work-life balance. One thing I had to change though was my apartment. I used to live in a pretty swanky place downtown, but I couldn't afford it on the new job's salary, so I had to move somewhere a little bit cheaper. My new place was okay, I guess. I didn't really have as much space, but it was decent enough. But then something strange happened. It happened when I was about a month and a half into my life in that apartment. I got home kind of late that night. I ran a bath while I was heating up my dinner. I took my bath at around 11 p.m. I was relaxing. I had just washed my hair, and I was feeling overheated. I was thirsty. I had a tremendous thirst on, all of a sudden. Since I lived alone, I had no issue to hop out of the bath and run to the fridge to grab something cold. So that's what I did. I opened the bathroom door and froze in place. I couldn't believe my eyes. There were wet footprints on the carpet. I was in the bath the whole time, and it wasn't raining that night, so I couldn't believe it. Those footprints were not mine. I no longer felt overheated. The footprints led from the bathroom outward into the lounge. I wrapped a towel around myself and cautiously followed those footprints. They went from the bathroom, through the lounge, into the hall, and into my bedroom. They seemed to stop at my bed. My first thought was, oh God, someone has broken in and they are hiding under my bed. So I carefully backed out of the dark bedroom and headed into the kitchen. I grabbed a knife from the kitchen to protect myself. I had no idea what would come next. It was an incredibly tense and stressful situation, but I knew I had to react. I had to do something. I summoned all my courage, stormed into my bedroom, hit the lights, and looked under the bed. There was nothing but a pitch-black empty space staring back at me. No one was there. My heart was racing. I couldn't figure out what the hell was going on. I went to the front door and checked that it was locked. It was locked and the chain was on. There was no sign that it had been kicked or tampered with. I was relieved, sure, but the mystery of the wet footprints wasn't resolved. I couldn't escape the fear of the unknown. What the hell was that? I went back to the bathroom, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I quickly rinsed my hair off. Man, that was a horrible couple of seconds. I dried my hair, with my back to the wall, terrified yet trying to compose myself. I had to go to bed, but there was simply no way in hell that I would be sleeping in the dark that night. I got into bed, and surprisingly, I felt as if I wouldn't have much trouble getting to sleep. I guess I was more tired than I realized. I was finally able to fall asleep. I don't know how long I had been asleep for, but I suddenly woke up. I'm not sure if it was because I slept with the light on that night. I usually sleep in the dark, and it's always hard to stay asleep or fall asleep with the light on for me. It was like it was dark outside still. You know that feeling when you wake up in the middle of the night and you feel as if it's morning, but it's not? I guess it was kind of like that. I heard a faint sound coming from somewhere down the hallway. It was the sound of the bathroom door opening. I gripped the covers as tightly as possible. My fingers must have been turning white with the pressure I was applying. I froze. I was praying that it was just my imagination, but I was wrong. I heard what sounded like footsteps next. The footsteps sounded kind of wet. Whatever that was making that noise and had left those footsteps while I was in the bath was now heading towards the bedroom. I guessed that they were coming towards me, just like the footprints I saw when I got out of the bath. They led from the bathroom to the lounge, through the hall, and finally to the bedroom. I cannot describe how terrifying that was, hearing footsteps in my home coming from the bathroom. I knew that I was the only person in that apartment. I knew that the doors were locked. I knew that there was no one hiding as I had searched while I was armed. The squelchy footprints seemed to mock my belief in logic. They were absolutely unexplainable. They were paranormal. The footsteps didn't rush or move at what I would describe as a normal pace. It was a stilted and slow pace. At some points, I swear, it was as if 10 seconds had passed between each step. All the while, I was in bed trying to rationalize this, hoping that my brain would guide me to an explanation. I tried to believe that I was wrong, maybe hearing things, maybe it was street noise or even a neighbor, but in my heart I knew that wasn't true. Those footsteps were getting closer and closer, definitely closer. My back was facing my bedroom door and the covers were over my head. I could sense something approaching. It was spring, but it felt like it was midwinter. If I had popped my head out of the safety of my covers, then I would have seen my breath fog. I'm sure of that. The footsteps were getting louder and louder, and I'm in bed, just screwing my eyes shut as tightly as possible. All I could do was just shiver in bed. The footsteps finally approached my bed, and I felt what I can only describe as a cold gaze on my back. I was very, very aware that I wasn't alone. I know this sounds hard to believe, but what can I say? A couple of agonizing seconds go by, and then something happened. The feeling of being glared at, the icy chill in the room, and the footsteps, they all went away. I then heard something shuffle and maneuver itself under my bed. The room was silent except for one sound. It sounded like something held its breath as it seemed to make itself comfortable under my bed. What could I do? I just stayed silent. I couldn't bear the tension, yet I couldn't summon the bravery to move. How long was I like that? I don't know. Maybe a minute? I say that because that minute definitely felt longer than a minute. An hour, maybe 30 minutes? My perception of time was out the window. Then a horrific sound filled the room, a terrible trill. I knew that sound, and it came from my alarm. I hurriedly reached for my phone and turned the alarm off. I don't know why, but all I can say is that when I woke up, I guess I was asleep maybe, I don't even remember falling asleep. Anyway, when I woke up, it was 6 a.m., and I didn't think that there was a presence under the bed anymore. I took the plunge, and I leaned over the side of my bed, my hair touching the ground, and I peered into the space under the bed. Again, there was nothing but darkness looking back at me. It looked like the space under my bed was a little wet, though. I had to move out after that. It was hell. It wasn't ever as bad as that after that night. But on multiple occasions before I left, I heard doors open, drawers open, and the drip, drip, drip of water in the bathroom. I would love to know what happened in there before I got there, but I'm not in a hurry to research it that much. It was terrifying enough. Back when I was in junior high school, I was taken on a class trip into the mountains. It was called a mountaineering camp. There were about 30 of us in total, boys and girls, and teachers. We were all riding the bus to the campsite, but we got delayed due to an accident on the roads. That meant that we would be getting there later than expected, but still light out when we arrived. We got off the bus, and with our class teacher at the helm, we headed into the woods, up towards the mountain campsite. The road to the campsite was very well signposted, and the direction was pretty much linear, so even the dumbest of us couldn't get lost or stray from the trail. Confident in that fact, I followed on at the back of the group. Everyone knows the cool kids go at the back, right? At some point my legs got tired or I got bored of walking, so I thought that I would take a quick break. I guessed that I would be fine, because I could be pretty quick when I wanted to be. I mean, I could still see my classmates' backs going up the mountain ahead. I waited until they were just in sight, and the second I couldn't see them, I rose to my feet and started climbing. I think that I left it a little too late though, because I wasn't as quick as I thought I would be. The trail was tough. I couldn't catch up to them. I was getting nervous. I tried to go as fast as I could to catch them, but no matter what I did, I couldn't see anyone's backs anymore. It was getting darker and darker too. Before I knew it, it got so dark that I couldn't even see my surroundings clearly anymore. I wasn't nervous now. I was on the verge of panic. I did what I thought would be best, and I started calling out the names of my closest friends. I couldn't make out what was up or down anymore. I had tears in my eyes. I was so scared of being lost in the woods, and so angry at myself for not keeping up with my classmates. I had to keep walking though. I thought that if I kept going, I was sure I would catch up to everyone, and everything would be fine. After a while, I thought that I saw a flicker of yellow in the darkness ahead of me. We were given these yellow ponchos for the trip. They were like raincoats, and we were to wear them if it began to rain. I had been so distracted by being frightened that I hadn't noticed that it had started to rain. I called out thinking that it was one of my classmates, but I guess they couldn't hear me because they didn't stop. I tried to up the pace, but I couldn't go much faster than I was already going. I closed the gap between me and one of my classmates. They were only about 20 meters or so ahead. I was calling out to them, but they still couldn't hear me. I couldn't catch them up. Knowing that they weren't going to stop, and I wasn't going to stop them, I paused to catch my breath again. I put on my yellow poncho, and I stayed where I was. The more I stood there waiting, the more I came to realize that there was no way that my classmate wouldn't have heard me. I stood there in the pitch black darkness, completely lost and terrified. I don't know how long I was there for, but it felt like hours. When it all looked its darkest, literally, I saw a light flickering between the trees. 3 people were approaching, and one was the teacher. I didn't think I could cry anymore at that point, but when I saw them, I started wailing. The place they found me at was about an hour's walk up the mountain from the campsite. I had somehow passed the campsite. It was the weirdest thing. Everyone was so relieved to see me, but above all, I was the most relieved to be found. There was one thing that was left unresolved, though. The classmate I thought I saw. I felt as if I was being led somewhere at one point. Whatever I was following clearly wasn't one of my classmates. All those missing person cases that happened out there in the wild and those theories about some mountain ranges in the USA, to me, that all could be real. There could be something out there. This happened when I was left home alone as a youngster one night. It was horrifying. I think the reason I was left home alone was probably due to my parents both working late one night simultaneously. My family home was opposite a national highway on one side, and on the other side it faced the sea. It's a very rural place, like literally in the middle of nowhere. That night I was watching something dumb on TV quite late. Whenever my parents were out late, they always told me to take myself to bed on time, but I never did. I just stayed up late. That night, like I say, I was watching some late-night variety show in the living room. My cat was with me, being lovely and fluffy as usual. Suddenly, I heard a knock at one of the windows of the living room. It came from the side of the house that faced the national highway. It sounded kind of deliberate, kind of like this. It was kind of windy out that night, so I guessed that maybe a tree limb or something tapped the glass. I don't know, out in the countryside you tend to hear all kinds of things late at night, and I guess you grow to live with them. I just kept right on watching TV without worrying about it. A few moments or so passed and I hear something else. This time it sounded as if the knocking came from another window in the room next to the lounge. I started to feel a little spooked. The first few pangs of fear, but I let it go. I just kept watching TV. I knew that no one but me was in the house or around the house. Then I heard another series of knocks. This time they came from the front door. At this point, young though I was, I couldn't help but notice a pattern. A few windows had been knocked. It wasn't as if I was hearing the knocking from one continuous location. Something was wrong. I sat frozen to the sofa considering whether to turn the volume up or down. One part of me wanted so much to ignore the knocking sounds, but the other part of me screamed at me to listen, to turn off the TV and react. I turned down the volume, but not fully off. I didn't want to be plunged into silence. I wanted the safety of the voices on TV. The knocking continued. This time it sounded as if it came from the back door, and then the kitchen window. At that point, I realized that the knocks were sort of circling me, going around the house. These knocks were so light that each time I heard them, I doubted myself but couldn't convince myself. The knocks then reached the sea-facing window of the lounge, and I guessed, if there was any method to the madness, that the knocks would likely stop after one full round of the house. However, I found that I was quickly proven wrong. I heard much louder and much more deliberate sounding knocks at the lounge window facing the highway. After a minute maybe, the same knocking sound at the same volume came from the window next to the lounge. I thought to myself instantly, it's a lap. Someone's doing a lap around our house, and their knocks get louder once they return to the place they started. Yeah, at this point, I wasn't convinced it was the wind anymore. I decided to anticipate the next knock and head to the front door. Our front door has a frosted glass panel so you can see in or out clearly. The knock came clearly at the front door, but I couldn't see anyone there. I looked outside the downstairs bathroom window, but again I couldn't see anyone. I heard a knock coming from the room next to the kitchen, and I knew that the knocks were once again moving. I was getting so scared now, I rushed back into the lounge. In the lounge, I saw that my cat was looking agitated. I sat there wide-eyed, listening to the sound of the knocks, slowly moving around the house. I was just frozen in place. I didn't know what to do. I felt as if it was probably a bad idea to stay in the living room. I picked up my cat, and I planned to escape upstairs. There was one problem, though. The stairs were in view of the front door and one of the windows, so I needed to wait until the knocks were at the back door before I could run upstairs. As soon as I heard those knocks at the back door, I raced upstairs. I didn't even turn my bedroom light on. I just held my cat tightly to my chest and strained my ears to listen for any noises. The knocking came again. It had completed its second round of the house, and now was beginning its third. I decided to use the darkness of my bedroom as a vantage point. I looked out of the second floor window. My bedroom was directly above the lounge, so if someone was down there, I should have been able to see them. But once again, I couldn't. I heard knocking, but no one's there. I was on the verge of panic. The cat starts growling and hissing. I don't know if there was an extremely stealthy person out there, or if I was dealing with something paranormal. I had the gut feeling that it was human, though. The knocking was really, really loud now. It was terrifying. I didn't know what I could do. The house phone was downstairs and I was way too freaked out to go back down there. Then something happened. Gradually the knocks grew quieter and softer until they were barely audible. The cat began to calm down a little too. When my cat lay on my bed and closed her eyes, I knew that she didn't feel threatened anymore. I felt as if everything was alright. I decided to go and get ready for bed. I had learned my lesson about staying up too late. I was just about to leave my room and go and brush my teeth when I heard something. The knocking was back, and it was louder than ever. It sounded as if every window in our house was being knocked at once, and the cat went mental. Full on arched her back and her fur was standing on end. I had no idea what to do. I just crawled into bed and covered myself with my bedding like a coward. I was crying. I didn't know why someone was messing with our house like that. The banging was so loud, it felt like the walls were shaking. I was mumbling out loud something like, "Please leave us alone, I can't take it anymore." I don't know how long I was like that in bed, but before I knew it, the knocking sound had quietened down again, and the front door was opening. I was terrified. Whoever was out there had managed to get in. But then, just as quickly as fear had overwhelmed me, relief did. I heard the voices of my parents coming from the foot of the stairs. That kind of phenomena has never happened again at my family home. I have no clue if someone was messing with our home, to intimidate us, or maybe it was some of my school friends pranking me. They never owned up to it, if it was them though. Sometimes I wonder if it was something supernatural. I have heard rumors about those lost at sea, returning, and knocking on doors. Hi, Jay here. Actually, I cover that last point in more depth in another video. I will put a link to that one in the bio. It was in the Sea Story collection if you've heard that one before. I was on a business trip in a really remote area. One of the ways I like to keep fit is by jogging. I sit at a desk most of the day and then behind the wheel of my car, so I like to get out and about every once in a while. I finished work and I got ready for my jog. I remember that it was a pretty cold day, so I put on a neck warmer. Usually when I'm staying away on business trips, I'm in the city. So when I run, I usually run through streets, but because I was in a remote area, I felt it would be a great chance to run off-road, through the woods. I planned on running around for about half an hour, but I was really enjoying the run and the scenery, so I just kept going. I was making good time too. I headed deeper and deeper into the woods. I crossed a river at one point. I was really curious as to where I would end up. Eventually, I came out at a kind of forestry school in the middle of the woods. I looked down at my watch and I noticed that it was almost 9 p.m. Pretty late, actually. When I looked up, I saw a large, dark shadow. I stopped in my tracks. There was a small, dim sensor light close to the forestry school, and it came on. The shadowy figure shambled towards the school and into the light, and my heart skipped a beat. I knew what that shadow was instantly. A bear was about 20 meters ahead of me, and it was a big bear. I felt like all the blood in my body ran ice cold. I couldn't move. I couldn't act. All I could do was just stand there like a statue watching the bear. Then suddenly something brought me back to my senses, a very unique noise. It was the sound of the bear grunting. It was now close enough that I could hear it breathing. The bear looked to be about as big as an adult, maybe a bit bigger. and a lot thicker. Oh, fuck, I thought. I turned and ran as fast as I could. The moment I started running was the moment I realized that I had broken the first rule for bear encounters. You should never run from a bear. I looked back over my shoulder and I saw that gigantic black shadow bounding towards me. It was too late. I was being pursued. Even though a bear is much bigger than a human, the speed they can come at you with is unbelievable. I've never been so horrified. A memory came back to me suddenly. It was something my grandpa said. He was a man who loved the wild, and I looked up to him. I realized that I needed to stop running in a linear line if I stood any chance. So I decided to dash into the bush off the side of the trail, and I felt instant agony as I clattered with some kind of jutting branches. I knew that I couldn't break my pace though. I got to a point where I realized that I couldn't run anymore. I just kind of fell into a barrel roll down a short verge. I kept moving as soon as I came to a stop because I could still hear that horrible grunting sound pursuing me. To be honest, I thought to myself, as long as my legs can carry me, I will keep moving. I didn't care if I got spiked by plants or if I ended up with bruises. I just had to keep going. I didn't care how long it would take for my legs to recover too, as long as I left the woods with my life. After the verge, I knew it wouldn't be long before I reached the river. I figured that if I got across the river, then the bear might give up. I don't know why I thought that, but I thought it would be the only shot I had. Thinking back on it, I guess that some part of me remembered that over the river was the town, and in the town there was lights and people. I landed in the river. It was freezing, slippery too because there was a ton of algae on the riverbed. It was really difficult to get a foothold, even more difficult when you know that something is gaining on you. I thought that I would be a couple of seconds ahead of the bear, but before I knew it, I heard the splash of water and the grunting noise it made when it breathed. It was louder than ever now. It was right next to me. It was at that moment that I knew it was all over. I remember a thought distinctly. As clear as a bell, I thought to myself, I am going to die. In those seconds I thought that, I felt my legs give way beneath me. I had slipped on the algae. The current swept me down the river at a rapid pace. I clattered with rocks. One hit me on the ball of my foot, and I knew I wouldn't be able to make a quick getaway if the bear was upon me again. I had some kind of faint hope in the back of my mind that the river would flow me downstream so fast that the bear wouldn't be able to keep up. I knew that I didn't just slip into the rapids though. I knew that that bear would catch me up in no time. It was going to be all over. I could imagine that thing's jaws locking onto one of my limbs. Just when it looked the darkest, a mini truck arrived. It stopped on the bridge just up ahead, and I heard a male voice call out, "Are you okay?" I think the guy was old. I couldn't see him all that well, because it was dark out, but I saw his mini truck's headlights. In the loudest voice I could muster, I shouted, "Bear! There's a bear! Help me!" I heard something like a match striking. Something was on fire, and then I heard some massive bangs. It sounded like explosives or fireworks going off. After a while I heard footfall approaching me. The old man was wading into the river. He grabbed me by my shoulder, and then something inside of me just sort of unclenched. I went from nothing to something. I thought it was all over, but I'm here today. He wrenched me out of the river and dragged me to his truck. I was taken to hospital. I spent some time in there. It turned out I had a couple of broken ribs, sprained ankles, bruises all over, not to mention hypothermia. I thanked the guy profusely who helped me. He happened to be a local farmer who was on his way back from a pachinko parlor. If you're not familiar with that word, it's basically a kind of legal gambling place in Japan. They're pretty popular, actually. Oh yeah, that explosive banging sound I heard. Yeah, those were firecrackers. He said that he carries them this time of year because of the threat of bears in the area. I really respected his quick thinking and the fact that he was prepared. What I respected more was the way he gave me a telling off. He laid into me for not being prepared. From not knowing what I was doing and having no defenses, like repellent, he talked to me like he was my dad. And you know what? I needed to hear it. I got yelled at so badly that I wanted to disappear into my hospital bed. Needless to say, I won't be making those mistakes again. I'm lucky to be alive, guys, and I know that. So please, for God's sakes, take precautions and be prepared when you head into the woods, especially in autumn. I noticed it around October time. I didn't know if it started before that. At around 2:30 a.m., the door handle to my front door began to turn. At first, I thought that it must be the wind. I remember saying it out loud as a question, "Is that the wind?" To be perfectly honest, it probably should have worried me more than it did, but I just sat there, watching TV. I thought that it was just a one-off, but then it happened again at the same time of night. No matter where I was at home, in the bath, in the toilet, or the living room, at 2:30 a.m., the door handle would always shake like mad. I was scared to open the door. I had a really bad feeling that that was a terrible idea. The most I could do was look through the peephole, but no one was out there. One night, my husband, who usually went to bed earlier than me, stayed up because he was curious. He looked out of the peephole at exactly 2:29 a.m. And there, before my eyes and his, the door handle shook as if someone was trying to enter our home. Yet there was not a soul outside. He turned to me with his face as pale as fresh snow and said, "I think we should never open the door and we should stop checking." We decided that night as a married couple to leave that unexplainable activity alone. I guessed that since no one was out there, it was okay, right? As the year went by, the door handle continued to rattle and we continued to ignore it. But 2 months after it all started, I fell ill. I went for an examination at the hospital and I remember seeing the doctor's face change when he noticed something. A cancer test was done and within 2 days I was diagnosed. I was admitted to hospital, operated on, and I survived. I was in the hospital for about a month and a half and was finally able to go home. I forgot all about the door and 2:30 a.m. and my husband, who must have been wrought with fear and stress, forgot about it too. I asked him if it was still going on, and he couldn't answer. He said that he would stay up that night to see if anything was happening. He couldn't do enough for me once I got out of the hospital. When I woke up in the morning, I asked him about what had happened. He said he stayed up until 3, and the door handle didn't rattle once. I have had time to consider this, and this is what I think that rattling was. I think it was the Reaper. I know, it's a pretty out there theory, but I have had a lot of time to consider my mortality lately. I have spoken with my husband about this theory, and he isn't against this idea. I remember his words at the time. "I think we should never open the door and we should stop checking." I think if I opened that door, I wouldn't be here anymore. I'm sure that that was the Reaper coming for me. I'm sorry if this story's a bit long, but it's true. I live in a small town which was partially destroyed in the Miyagi earthquake. Many homes were lost. Our house wasn't affected too badly. One of the outer walls were damaged and a huge chest of drawers fell down. Since we work from home, it was a bit disruptive and difficult to find the time to clean up. I was taking calls from customers every day. My dad was busy working and visiting customers. Since the damage was so great, we had nothing but sympathy for them, and we wanted to do everything we could for them. A week passed in the blink of an eye. One weekend, I knew I had to clean the house up, but I was just so tired. I couldn't find the energy. So I decided to go on a solo trip to the hot springs to rejuvenate myself. There was one about 40 minutes away by car. I got back later, and from the car I could see that a light was on the second floor. My parents and my grandparents are usually out at around this time I got back. Furthermore, the light that was on was the light in my bedroom. I left for the hot springs at around midday, so I would have no reason to turn that light on. I wondered if it was my little brother. He lives in Tokyo, but he might have come back to visit us. Maybe he was in my room playing on my console or something. It was a bit of a stretch, but it did seem feasible at the time. I parked up and walked into our family home, not noticing that the door was unlocked and my brother's shoes weren't by the entrance. I called out that I was home. I ran upstairs and down the hall to my bedroom. The door was shut. I opened it and saw that my room was empty. Yet the light was still on. My bed looked different, especially the covers. Some of my drawers were open too. It dawned on me now that the door shouldn't have been unlocked if everyone was out. Why was my bedroom light on? Where was my brother? So many different thoughts swirled around my head. I froze in place. Suddenly, I couldn't move. I remembered that there had been burglaries in the area, and I stood there, shocked. I looked around my room and noticed that my PC and monitor were turned on. Now I knew that a person had been in here recently. If you leave your computer on, the monitor goes to sleep after a while, right? They could still be in the house, I grimly thought. I tried to regain my composure and think about what to do next. I then heard a noise from my closet. The intruder was in my closet. I looked over and saw an eye peering at me from the crack between the doors. I ran for it as fast as I could downstairs and out the door. I got into my car and drove to a friend's house. I called my parents when I got there. I didn't call the police. I should have, but I was in such a panic, I guess I just wanted to know if my parents were okay too. That was pretty dumb of me, I know. Luckily my dad was close by, and he raced home, and he checked the house over, but he couldn't find the intruder anywhere. There was no sign of anything in any other rooms being disrupted either. It seemed as if my room was the only room which had been targeted. The strangest thing was that nothing had been stolen. I told the police at this point, but they told me that what had happened was probably just a misunderstanding, and I had forgotten to turn the computer off and the light off and lock the door. They therefore wouldn't investigate. This really pissed me off. The whole incident freaked me out. I wondered if my family had a stalker. I thought about that for a while and spoke with my family, and then I remembered. A guy. From the year before last to last year, even though I would do nothing other than stay at home or hang out with my friends, a guy was harassing me. We only went out on a couple of dates, and I quit seeing him after he started to become possessive. He would hide outside my house and jump out at me, call me constantly, drop off gifts, and just genuinely terrify me. It stopped at around October time last year. I thought that was all behind me. He lived miles away in the next city, but he was super persistent. He was crazy. This really scared me, so my dad decided to take things into his own hands. He went to this guy's house to confront him. There was no evidence that this was the guy who had been in our home. There was no evidence that anyone had been in our home, but I had a gut feeling he was something to do with it. I wanted him to admit it, so the police could get involved and I could get a restraining order. We arrived at his house, and as we did, his mother ran out to greet our car. She didn't look well. You're the one who did this to my son, she called. She looked so angry. He died yesterday, she stated in a low voice. We didn't know what to say. My dad began to stutter an apology and began to explain the purpose of our visit, but she cut him off. What did you do to my son? I did my best to explain the chain of events which led us to her house. Last year, and the one before, the break-in, etc. Then she looked at me and said, "You killed him." Then she just started screaming it. We argued, but there was nothing we could say to her. Obviously, she must have known something about what had happened, otherwise she wouldn't have reacted like that. We gave up and went back to the car. We didn't want to worsen her pain if her son was really dead. She didn't seem herself. She was always nice when I met her. My dad really wanted to get to the bottom of this. He was so angry that someone had been in our family home. We drove to a convenience store and waited there for about an hour, and then went back to his family home. My dad tried one of the neighbors. I think it was the second house down from his. He asked if they knew anything about what had happened. And it seems as if he did take his own life, but they could not be certain. They said that he had demons for sure, and that they would hear him screaming late into the night. This was disturbing and sad, to be honest. When we got home, we talked about other things to stop thinking about it. I was winding down to get ready for bed. I was checking my emails and listening to some music. I always saved my MP3s in my documents for some reason. I opened the folder and noticed a text document that hadn't been there before. It was addressed to me. I was worried about opening it. I didn't like it. After a few agonizing moments, my curiosity got the better of me. I opened it, and it horrified me. Of course, it was from that man. All my suspicions were now justified in this document. I read it all, and it made me feel sick to my stomach. He was writing it as if it was the last words anyone would read by him. It was like a suicide note. He had detailed all the dates we had been on, as well as writing about made-up dates that we'd never been on. He sounded completely deluded. He was so normal when I met him. He went to a good university, and he was a perfectly fine person. Why did he do this? It was so sad. But I had no proof that he was dead. I found no obituary, and believe me, I looked for one. I started to get really creeped out again, and before long, I felt eyes on me wherever I went. I decided to park further away from our house, and I changed rooms. I noticed that from close by, on a hill, if you had binoculars, you could see right into my second floor bedroom. I now live on the ground floor in my brother's old room. I still feel as if he's out there somewhere, but I doubt it from time to time. This is just a reminder that if stalking stops after a while, it doesn't mean that it's stopped for good. I mean, he got into our house, and he knew the password to unlock my computer. This happened when I was in high school. It happened on a Saturday. That day, it had been raining non-stop since the morning. With little other options, I just texted my friends and played some online games with them. Before I knew it, it was the afternoon, and the rain hadn't shown any signs of letting up. When it got to around 7 p.m., I gave up all hope of going out for the day. It was still hammering down out there. I was lounging around watching TV at home, and there was an interruption to the scheduled program. It was a local warning, which told residents to be aware of potential flooding. We got that warning, I guess, at around 8 p.m. My family of 6 were all huddled in the living room together. We were just carrying on our night. I don't know why, but none of us seemed that worried by the warnings on TV. I don't know how long we sat there, but after a while, I heard a dull clicking sound, and then everything went dark. We were in pitch black darkness. My father stumbled off towards his bedroom, mumbling something about going to get a torch. He lit the way using the torch on his smartphone. My mother got up to look outside. The power seemed to have been knocked out for our whole neighborhood. It was so dark in the house, it almost seemed to amplify the sound of falling rain. It was still showing no signs of letting up, and it made me think about those warnings we heard earlier. Some of my family got up to find lights or to head back to their bedrooms to look out of the windows, or to look for candles and battery-operated things like radios and torches. I stayed in the living room with my grandma for a while, and she said that we might need to evacuate if things get worse. I wanted to go get my phone, so I could tell my friends what was going on, so I went back into my room and grabbed it. I was scrolling through some social media, and then I noticed that my battery was a little low, so I thought to myself, better stop and save the battery. I just spent some of the time looking out at the rainfall, listening to it. It was pretty relaxing, even though I was, and still am, a bit of a night owl. I started to feel sleepy. I remembered that I had an old battery charger in a drawer somewhere. I found that and put my phone on charge and killed time by reading a manga by torchlight. By that time, I heard no TV on downstairs, no chatter of the family. Everything was quiet. I guessed that the elders in my family had decided to get an early night. Maybe the rain wasn't going to be as bad as they said it would be on TV. It was about 10 p.m. when I heard the doorbell ring. It was late. We never really heard the doorbell ring at that time of night, but I guessed this was a different set of circumstances. I thought it might be our neighbor, Mr. Saito. He might have come over to see how we were all doing or to give us some information. Someone might be telling us that it was time to go, time to evacuate. I left my bedroom on the second floor and headed downstairs. I was surprised that it looked like I was to be the one who was to go and open the door. Maybe everyone else was still sound asleep. As I headed downstairs, I noticed something. There was a huge shadow behind the frosted glass of our front door. It looked very big and not like my neighbor. But just in case, I called out his name. Mr. Saito? Whoever that shadow belonged to behind the glass didn't reply. It just stood there. I started to get scared at that point because I knew it wasn't my neighbor or anyone else who was here to help, because why would you just stand there in silence? It looked like it was staring at me. Before I knew it, I found myself backing away from the door. I saw the figure shift from side to side as if it was about to try the door. It was like my mind went blank. I ran as fast as I could upstairs to the safety of my room, and I slammed the door and stood behind it. And that was the first time in my life that I literally stood stock still, unable to think rationally, just in a pure panic. The doorbell rang again, and it felt as if my heart was about to flatline. I still remember it very vividly. Even when I think back on it nowadays, I can still see that dark figure behind the door. Just after the doorbell, I heard my father making noises downstairs. Finally, someone is up. I felt now brave enough to leave my bedroom and to listen to what was going on from the hallway. I leaned over the banisters and saw my grandfather and grandmother were joining my father down there in the lounge. I went down a few stairs to be in earshot, and I heard my dad say, "The doorbell rang, right?" Everyone was in agreement. Great, I wasn't hearing things. That's good. I fearfully looked towards the front door and I saw that the shadow was gone. That was really good. I was scared of thieves, you know? Opportunistic thieves that might be looking at breaking into homes. Some people in town might have already evacuated and their homes were stood unoccupied. A perfect chance for someone looking to break in. Then I heard the doorbell ring again for the third time. I watched as my grandpa opened the door. He must have gotten to the door in about 3 seconds, but by the time the door was open, there was no one out there. Grandpa quickly shut the door and I swear I saw a dark shadow pass by once more. Someone was out there. They probably weren't scared that the person they saw from wherever they hid was pretty old, and they probably thought that they could take Grandpa on if they had to. My dad was shocked. I could see the fear on his face as he ran upstairs right past me to wake up my mum and sister. My dad gathered all of us in the living room. Just as he was telling us to calm down, we heard a tremendous noise coming from outside. I heard tree limbs snapping and the sliding of something heavy. We lived in the shade of a big mountain, and I know now that what I heard was the sound of a landslide. The mud, boulders and trees on the mountain were soon to be heading towards our town on a river of rainfall. My dad was screaming, "Everyone in the car, let's go," stuff like that. We should have given more respect to the warnings we had heard on TV. I was thinking, please let us get out of here safe, and I promise I'll learn my lesson. I was young and terrified. I don't know who I was even pleading to. We piled into the car, and there were clumps of earth in the streets, sand everywhere. It was a real mess. Everything was just coming down, and the water was so fast, it was honestly terrifying. The roads were treacherous, but my dad managed to navigate through the path of destruction, and we got far enough away to feel safe. We later learned that our family home had suffered many damages. I'm certain that if we delayed leaving any longer, then any one of us could have been potentially swept away in the flood. It was a real close call. My grandpa has a theory, and it's one that I'm happy to buy into. I think everyone in our family believes it, but I guess to different extents. His theory goes like this. It wasn't a criminal at the door trying the doorbell. He said that it was our guardian spirit, because if it wasn't for that doorbell ringing, then I guess that none of us would have woken up apart from me, and to be honest, I was content in hiding in my room, and I wouldn't have been able to evacuate the family. Had it not been for the doorbell, we might not have made it out to the car in time. We might have been trapped in our house, or we might have even been washed away in the floods. Come to think of it, should doorbells in houses ring when there's a blackout? I'm lucky to be here. I think we all are. So if that was a guardian spirit, thank you. This happened about 7 or 8 years ago, but it still gives me the creeps when I think back on it. I used to live by the waterside near a station on the KSA line. I was out one night with some work colleagues. We had a little get-together after work. It turned into a bit of an all-night session, so I took the last train home. I used to leave my bike chained up at the station because I used to cycle to and from the station home. I used to ride my bike down the waterside, the tidal flat. There was a promenade. That was the route I took that night, and the same route I always took, but after that night, I never went out that late again down there. Roughly halfway along the waterside promenade, there was a bench. It is opposite an elementary school, and I decided to stop there for a while and smoke a cigarette to try and sober up a little. I always liked the promenade because it had great lighting, even at night. It felt like the safest route home. It was summer, the days were still really hot and humid, and the nights weren't much better. The heat just seemed to linger in the air. It was really unpleasant some nights. I looked out to the water while smoking, and after a few moments I noticed something. Well, I felt something. It felt as if someone was watching me. I felt eyes on my back. I turned around and faced the school, and there was no one there. I wondered if I was imagining things, maybe a little drunker than I thought I was, but something inside me told me that I wasn't overreacting. I looked carefully, but I couldn't see anyone or anything out of place. Naturally, I lost interest and turned back to face the waterside. When I turned back, I saw something. I saw something off to the right in the distance. There was a dark shadow. It looked so out of place. I'm sure that it wasn't there before. The shadow was in the shape of a person, but the outlines were wrong. It was all blurry. I instinctively knew that it wasn't a person. I knew that straight away. At the same time I saw a shadow, a stench seemed to drift towards me. It smelled like something was rotten, but rotten in water. I hope that makes sense, maybe a bit like sewage. The shadow was coming my way. It was horrifying. I watched it get closer and closer. I was frozen with fear and a strange kind of amazement. I was sat on the bench watching, just completely not believing my eyes. The only thing that brought me back to my senses was when the ash from my lit cigarette fell on my work trousers. I realized that whatever that thing was, it was a threat. Realizing that made me rise to my feet and run. I didn't even care about my bike. I just wanted to be away from that thing. I just desperately searched for some light. I felt like I needed to be in the light. I managed to take shelter in a nearby convenience store. I stayed there until I managed to calm myself down. I remember hiding in the bathroom for so long that a member of staff knocked on the toilet door to ask if I was okay. I left and went home without further incidents. I thought about getting my bike back, but I couldn't face going back down by the waterside again. I woke up the following morning. I overslept, and the quickest route to the train station was via the waterside promenade. In the morning light, with a slightly more sober head, I thought about the possibility that I could have been imagining it all. Maybe it was some kind of strange dream or drunken hallucination. I approached the route to work with confidence with this on my mind. I was also interested in checking if my bike was still there or not. I didn't think it would be. But when I got close to the school, I realized that miraculously my bike was there. It was right where I left it. I was certain that it would have been gone, but I was glad to see it. When I got closer, I realized something was a little different about it. It looked like it had literally been dredged through a riverbed. It was covered in sludge, grime, and dirt, and it smelled horrible. It barely looked like my bike, but I knew that it was because I recognized the stickers. It was the weirdest thing. In some places it looked like it had been rusted or corroded as well. And I know that doesn't happen overnight. It was like it had just arrived from someplace else. There was a hole in the metal as well, which made no sense to me. I loved that bike. Did someone throw it in the water, and then someone else magnet fishing or something, bring it back out and put it where I left it in the exact spot? I really doubted that. Still, I needed to get to work and I was late, and I didn't have a faster method available. So I wiped it down with some pocket tissues and hopped on. The smell was horrible, but I needed to get to work. I parked the bike at the station like I always did, but I didn't bother chaining it up. I thought that nobody would want it. When I got back, after work, it wasn't there. I guess that someone stole it. Probably some homeless guy. No matter, I thought to myself. I was probably only going to sell it or scrap it anyways. Here's where things get very weird and probably unbelievable from your point of view. A few days later, I read in the local news that a homeless man had passed away. Sad, but not really connected, right? Wrong. I kind of feel like it's connected. The homeless guy died covered in something they said was foul smelling, something like sludge. He died in a park far from the waterfront. It just didn't seem possible. If my bike was stolen by that guy and it smelled how it did when I left it, could the two be related? Did he save me somehow? Or were these two incidences merely coincidences? Or is there something more at play? Something that began with me seeing that strange shadowy figure down by the promenade. I don't think I'll ever know. But I never walk down by the waterfront at night anymore. I don't want to see that shadowy figure ever again. Something's been happening, and it's related to my dreams. My family home is in a very rural area. It's basically at the foot of some tall mountains. All through our little town, there are fields and fields. We are surrounded by them. But my family home was up a steep road leading to the mountains. I don't know if many people can relate to this, but it's what I grew up with. I had a temple next door. Yeah, an actual temple. Other than that, I guess you could say that there wasn't much in my neighborhood. Once you go down the kind of plateau that our home was placed on, we were a few hundred meters up, by the way. There was a road though, but walking up there was horrible. Anyway, if you went down that road, you would see streets and houses, but picture a rural area. The houses were scattered around. So of course you could imagine the road, or walk up to my family home when it was dark, or even during the evening, was a little bit creepy. Well, that's an understatement, to be honest with you. It couldn't be more eerie when it was dark. I used to hear the scuttle and cry of all kinds of animals and insects. I want to tell you about an experience I had one dark night at home. I was in elementary school at the time. I was in the lower grades, and I was still sleeping in the same room as my parents when this happened. I'm not embarrassed, it's actually not that rare in Japan. That night, I had a very strange dream. I was giving my parents some kind of passionate speech in the living room. I have no idea what I was saying, I have no idea why I was doing it, but isn't that the very nature of a dream? It's all over the place, right? One thing I do remember is that my mother was listening intently. I was reaching the close of whatever the hell I was talking about, and I was about to unleash the final point I wanted to make. It was at that point I said, "So," and I left this great pause to lead into my conclusion. I even banged my fist on the table for dramatic effect. In the dream, of course. At that point, I heard a child's voice, and it called out to me from a closet I knew to be in the room behind the living room. I heard that child's voice, and I heard it say, "Mo ikai." Hi, Jay here. That's what you would say if you were playing a game of hide and seek. It's what you would say if you turned away and you had finished counting, kind of like, "Are you ready?" or something like that. Anyway, back to the story. When I heard that, I thought to myself, is someone trying to play hide and seek with me? In my dream, I spun around and looked towards the hallway where there was a closet. I looked at it for what felt like a second or two, and then a door to our storeroom, which was like a basement, swung open, and what emerged from behind that storeroom door was a solid black silhouette of a kid of about my age, a young kid. It jumped out and shouted, "Mo-iyo!" Hi, Jay again, sorry. Mo-iyo means I'm ready, in response to the hide and seek thing. Are you ready? I'm ready, that kind of thing. Back to the story. Then this pitch black humanoid mass ran at me. I couldn't move. Then, just as it ran at me, another one of these weird dark figures jumped out of the closet in the hallway I had walked over to. The two figures then cut a curve in front of me and raced down the hallway towards the guest room. In my dream, I chased those dark figures, but I didn't know why the hell I did that. Then, when I turned the corner to enter the guest room, I just suddenly woke up. I looked around the living room and saw that my parents were sleeping. The room was dimly lit. I thought, oh, whoa, it's morning. For some reason, the moment after that thought occurred to me, my heart started to beat like crazy. I felt like the dream wasn't over for a second. I thought, whoa, this has been a weird night. Well, I better go back to sleep and wait for Mum to wake me up later. I closed my eyes and tried to drift off. Then suddenly my body felt as if it was no longer under my control. Cold sweat began to amass my forehead. I didn't know at the time, but it was sleep paralysis. I remembered my dream of those dark shadow people, and my stomach began to tie in knots. I tried to call out to my parents who were sleeping close by, but I couldn't make a sound. It's like the words were stuck in my throat. I could hear the labored breathing coming out of me when I tried, but I couldn't make a sound. When I didn't try to scream or shout, I could hear the natural rhythm of my breathing. It was like listening to myself sleep. It went dark. I think I lost control of my eyelids. I felt my body suddenly jerk upwards and then back down to the bedding. I was then able to open my eyes, and I saw nothing but darkness. I thought, hang on, it was morning a minute ago. I had no idea what was happening, and I was terrified beyond belief. I was able to move when I opened my eyes, and I raced over to my parents. I tried to explain to them what happened, while begging to sleep in between the middle of them in their bed. My dad moaned about it being 2 a.m. or something, but then he turned over and went back to sleep. My mum listened intently, but I don't think for 1 second she believed me. I mean, a kid having a bad dream, it's not that unusual, right? Nothing else happened that night, but I thought about it the whole of the next day. The next night came and I woke up in the middle of the night again. I am not sure if that was down to nerves or something else, but I will say that I woke up feeling very scared. When I woke up on the second night, it was dark this time. I managed to convince myself that if I fell back asleep, I would be unable to move, or I might even see those shadow people again. Now, I was a very stubborn kid and I was kind of dumb. I needed sleep. I remember thinking, well, I just won't sleep tonight then. However, it was inevitable. I fell asleep the moment I stopped thinking about not falling asleep. I felt that the change was almost instantaneous. My body stopped moving again. It was different from what happened the night before. I knew I couldn't move, but this time I knew why. There was something on top of me. Or should I say, someone. The most horrible thing about the situation was whatever and whoever was on top of me was just kind of sitting on my stomach. And I knew it was happy about it. I knew it was happy. I could faintly hear something softly laughing. Then I was aware of another presence. This time it was off to my left. It was close. It was laying down as if it was sleeping. My parents slept to the right of me, so I only had this thing to the left. It felt as if that one was looking at me. Then the one on top of me was looking at me. I decided that I would close my eyes in an attempt to make them go away. I thought to myself that when I opened my eyes I would be awake in a brighter room with no one but my parents for company. Then the second I closed my eyes, I heard something move to the side of me. And then I heard a whisper in my ear. Hey, let's play. That's a voice I'll never forget. It was like a human's voice, but it didn't sound organic. I don't know if that makes any sense, but it sounded like an interpretation of a voice rather than a normal one. Like when you hear a robotic voice, something kind of uncanny about it. This one didn't sound modern like a robot though, it sounded the opposite. It sounded old, ancient. I know I'm not making any sense. In that moment I wanted to scream so badly. It was the worst thing I've ever heard. Once again, no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't make a sound. Hey, let's play hide and seek. It spoke to me. I don't know, but for some reason I was reminded, in that moment, about a book I had read at school, about being scared of monsters or something. There was a phrase in that book, I think it must have been only a picture book, but that phrase was something along the lines of, "Ghosts are afraid of strong people." So with that in mind, I replied to whatever wanted to play with me, in my mind as confidently as I could. I was all like, "Hey, who'd ever want to play with you, huh? You better not come back here again, you hear? I'll never play with someone as creepy or as weird as you." I thought thoughts like that for as long as I could, until I wasn't afraid anymore. I had been told before if I chanted, like the Buddhists in the temple next door, I could stand up to anything, and that seemed to work. It was like whatever was around disappeared in the blink of an eye. I timidly opened my eyes and the room was bright all around me. I was shocked, but I thought that I had just had another terrible nightmare. And then I felt something reminiscent of the nightmare. I felt a dead weight on my stomach again. Something was on top of me. And this was no dream. I turned over just in time to not be flat on my back, and I ended up facing the left corner, lying on my side, the direction where I saw that other shadow figure. I froze in bed. This time I couldn't even close my eyes. I was just like a stone statue that had been knocked over to the ground. I couldn't move my gaze from the corner of the room. I was completely fixated on it. Then darkness fell on the room. I was frantically thinking in my child brain, "No, please, it was light a few seconds ago." The darkness seemed to emit from the corner of the room, and I couldn't stop staring at it. And that was when I realized something. It wasn't the room that was getting darker, it was the darkness that was coming from the corner that was making the room darker by growing bigger. Out of the darkness, a shadowy figure shambled towards me. It swayed unsteadily as it moved. I heard it speak despite not seeing its mouth for the darkness, and it said, "Sorry." When I heard it say that, my consciousness slipped away, because that was the last thing I remember. That was the last experience I had with any form of sleep paralysis for a while. It was as if there had been a change, and for that I was grateful. After a few days, I became so curious about what had happened that I ended up asking the head temple priest for his advice and interpretation. He was old and wise, and I always looked up to him. Here's what he said to me. "You may have been greeted by the spirits of Mr. whose children were victims in the Great Kanto earthquake." Hi, Jay here again, sorry. This earthquake occurred in 1923 and claimed the lives of close to 150,000 people. Back to the story. "Mr. used to live down there in the town. His children were probably swept away in the landslide when it struck. They never found the bodies, no matter how hard everyone searched, and no one searched harder than Mr. Bonk. It was never the same after that. Those children, even though they were never seen again, they do have graves. I know that what I've told you might seem scary, but Might make you feel a little better if you wanted to visit their graves. I decided that I wanted to go with him to see the graves. It felt like the right thing to do, and it felt important to him as well. Their graves were covered in moss. They looked lonely. We stood before them, and I joined the priest in prayer. Then suddenly, as we were paying our respects, the priest started to speak, and what he said went something along the lines of this. I'm a year older than these two poor souls. They often came to play with me at my father's temple. On this day of the great earthquake, they probably came to visit me. That day I had taken a detour. I'd walked the long way home with another friend of ours. These two, they were probably playing up in the mountains waiting for me to come back. And it breaks my heart every time I think of my school friends. I'll always miss them. If I'd have gone straight home instead of taking that detour, then slim chance they might still be here. I was so taken aback by what the priest was saying that I ended up staring at him. He had his eyes tightly shut and he was staring at the two graves. He looked up once, way up into the mountain above. He had this look on his face that seemed to say, "What if?" He then looked at me with tears welling in the corners of his eyes and he said, Maybe those two you saw were looking for me. Maybe they've been looking for me for a while. I felt sorry. So sorry for them. I felt that I was really cruel to them when I said that no one would want to play with them. I mean, they've been waiting so long for someone to play with them. I guess that it can't be helped though. They actually terrified me when I saw them. I wonder if the chief priest knows that they were waiting to play hide and seek with him that day, way up in the mountains. Sorry for the long story. I bought a house in the suburbs a few years ago, and since I lived pretty close to the train station, I decided that I would use the train to commute to work. This was about 5 years ago, I guess. I had just had my son. These days I drive, and I have to put up with traffic, but there's a very good reason why I drive now. And I'll tell you. On the night this happened, I had been out with some co-workers after work. This kind of thing was standard in our company. We would usually get together, have a drink, like once a month. It was a late night. I knew it was going to be a late one, it always was. I wanted to make it home before the last train. My wife was at home with my son, and I didn't want her to be up late worrying about me. I think I caught the second or third from last train of the night back home. When I got on the train, I noticed it was almost empty, and that was really great. I had enough space to relax. I got a little too relaxed, and I fell asleep actually. I was pretty low on sleep. It was about a 50-minute train ride home, so I thought I might as well catch up on some lost sleep. But I didn't need to change trains either. I woke up, now and then, to see people exiting the train. In the daytime, you could see these huge high-rise apartment blocks from the train windows, so I guess these people were commuters like me. I knew from the station that I was in that I wouldn't be home for another 20 minutes or so I decided against shutting my eyes again. In order not to fall asleep, I stood up and faced the window. I figured that looking at something was probably better than being comfortable in my seat. I wanted the distraction. I watched shapes of buildings pass by under the cover of darkness. I tried to imagine where I was based on the shapes of those buildings. At the next stop, the last couple of people got off, leaving me completely alone. It was kind of unusual to be alone in a train at night. If you've ever seen the trains in Tokyo, you'll understand. They are always super crowded. I enjoyed the rarity of my situation. I was thinking strange things. The buzz I had from the beers earlier was wearing off and tiredness was in full effect. There might have been others on the train, but I'm specifically talking about my carriage. The most popular carriages were at the front because they were closest to the stairs when you got off. I always took about the third or second carriage when I rode the train, but anyway, that's not really important. I was about one station away from home. Between the next station and the station I get off at, there's a tunnel. This tunnel runs right through a mountain and plunges the train into darkness for about 3 minutes or so. When the train went into that tunnel, I used the opportunity to look at myself in the window. Due to the darkness, it acted like a kind of mirror, and I used that mirror to adjust my hair and try to make myself look more presentable for when I would go home and face my wife. What the hell? I heard myself mutter. Reflected in the dark window was a man sat opposite me. He was an old man who looked to be in his 50s. He looked like a hiker. I thought that I was completely alone in that carriage, so I freaked out for a moment. But due to how tired or buzzed I was, did I completely miss this guy? I asked myself. I decided that I did, and I told myself not to worry too much about it. I made a mental note to check my surroundings more thoroughly next time. I tried not to stare as well. I felt as if I couldn't help it though. The guy was staring into the window directly at me. He did not grin. He did not look away. He was fixated on me. The look that he was giving me wasn't a friendly one. I would describe it as expressionless. It was chilling. I didn't like it. I didn't want to turn around and face him. I decided not to be confrontational, for the sake of my wife and my newborn. I would take out my phone and ignore that weirdo's stare. As I pulled my phone out of my pocket, I managed to pull my house keys out with it. They fell to the floor. I stooped to pick up the keys, and the next couple of things happened in what felt like a split second. I looked into the window to keep an eye on this guy as I bent down to get the keys. He shot to his feet and emerged about 30 or 50 centimeters behind me. He was holding something in his hand and raising it above his head. It was a small axe, like a handy mountaineering ice pick axe kind of thing. I screamed. I was completely defenseless. I just kind of dived forward, keeping low towards the door to the next carriage. I had a plan in mind to get as close to the driver as possible. As I put my hand on the door that connects to the next carriage, I took the opportunity to look again to see what was happening behind me. It was instinctive. I imagined to see that guy racing right up behind me, but I couldn't see him anymore. He wasn't there. I don't know if he dropped down low to hide or attack in a different manner, or if he was ever there, but I couldn't see him anymore, and that terrified me. I ran right to the front of the train and waited a few terrifying moments, no more than 30 seconds in all actuality, for the train came to a stop at my station. The train pulled in and I shot off of it. A young couple and an office worker stared right at me as they boarded. I was in a complete state. I wanted to run for it, but as I turned to go, I thought about those people who would be getting on the train. Was that man I saw in the reflection of the glass still on board? I made some garbled plea with them not to get on the train, but they ignored me. The train started moving down the tracks and I walked and then ran to keep pace with it. I wanted to catch the attention of those people who boarded. I made some gestures with my arms while shouting at them. I told them not to go into the next carriage as best as I could given the circumstances. I told the station staff, and they threatened to call the police if I didn't stop making a scene. I had just had a close call. I couldn't calm down, I'll have to admit that, but I felt as if they needed to know. I just hope that somebody listened. I hope that whatever I saw was nothing more than the conjuration of a tired mind as well. But something in me doesn't believe that though. I think that was real. I never commuted to work again. I will never ride through that tunnel again. There are some expenses and inconveniences worth suffering, I guess. This is a story from my student days. I think it was about August time. We were staying on a small island. It was a school trip. It was on this remote island where we would dare each other. We were about 100 meters above the sea level on a small mountain. This island was partially destroyed in the war. You could see scars of the past all around. We were searching around on the mountain for war relics. One of my friends found a helmet in the bush. The island was full of debris. Earlier that day we were told that there were air raid shelters on the island. We wanted to find one and see who would be brave enough to go in. We waited until it was dark. It was perfect. We climbed up close to the summit and found what we were looking for. There was a huge air raid shelter. There was a clear path leading down the mountain. We approached the air raid shelter and felt cold air spilling out of it. It was the perfect setting. Everyone would start off with a candle at the bottom, and then they would make it to the top, wait for the others, and then we would all enter the air raid shelter together. A bunch of us were told by some of the seniors to go and hide in the bushes in different areas alongside the route up to the air raid shelter. And whenever we saw a light coming up the mountain, we were to make scary noises and shake the trees to scare who had taken on the dare of entering the abandoned air raid shelter. We went in groups so that we wouldn't know where people would be hiding. I saw the last group go by, and when that happened, we were all supposed to head back to the air raid shelter. I must have made a mistake because when I got to the air raid shelter, there was no one in sight. I didn't have a candle or a flashlight, I just stood there in the dark on a mountain. I felt as if I had been left behind. I didn't know how to get back down because it was so dark. I was at a complete loss, but then I heard what I thought to be the sounds of people coming from inside the air raid shelter. No voices. It just sounded like someone was walking around in there. And then I noticed something. I couldn't see any light coming from in there. Even though my eyes had gotten used to the dark, I couldn't see a thing. So that meant that there was someone in there, walking around, with no flashlight or candle. There was nothing but rubble in there. How would anyone know where they were heading? I thought about this as the footsteps sounded as if they were heading my way. My body decided before my brain to hide. It noped me right out of there. Fight or flight, you know? I hopped behind a nearby bush and ducked for cover. When I heard the footsteps approaching, I made a break for it down the mountain. I tripped and rolled about halfway down. I was covered in scratches and bruises. A flashlight shone into my eyes and I panicked. Luckily, it was one of my friends. They were all looking for me. I asked if any of them had been looking for me in the air raid shelter, and he said no. He said they all pretty much quit the dare after hearing the same footsteps I had heard. Who can blame them? To be honest, we were really lucky that none of us got hurt. I could have broken my neck falling down that mountain, or got impaled on something, not to mention whatever or whoever was in that air raid shelter and whatever their intentions were. Anyway, since I didn't technically do the dare, I was tasked with cleaning the place up. We had set up a load of lit candles near the entrance of the air raid shelter, and we were supposed to pick one up and enter with them. I had to go and get all these candles, as we didn't want anyone to know that we were messing around up there. I really didn't want to, but I went back up the mountain, half expecting my friends to start shaking trees and making creepy sounds to put me off. But thankfully they didn't. I guessed that they weren't still here. I reached the air raid shelter and felt that cold air once again emanating from it. I wanted to grab the candles and go, before I heard any more footsteps. I searched around for them, but I couldn't find them anywhere. I'm guessing some park ranger or someone picked them up, but I think it was the owner of those footsteps who found them. We didn't dare each other many more times after that night. I think we were closer to danger than we thought. I work for an apartment management company, kind of like real estate. I've been working here for a long time. I'm sure if you ask a lot of people in my line of work, you would likely find some with strange and creepy stories to tell. The company I work for owns about 12 buildings, and I manage them pretty much single-handedly. The way the company operates is by buying up properties on the market whenever they're cheap. This means the buildings we get aren't ever of the highest quality, and there's always a lot of work to do to get them up to scratch. I want to tell you about one of these properties. It's an apartment block and it's about 25 years old. We've been the owners of it for about 3 years now. The apartments in the building were all single apartments. Usually, our company would compete with others and attempt to outbid one another when it came to this building. But there wasn't any interest from any rival companies. When I looked over the tenancy agreements for the current residents, I got confused. It was as if every contract was different, and the rent payment plans were all over the place. It didn't seem normal at all, but having paying residents was a pretty good situation to be in. I guess it's kind of rare in auctions. There were 3 vacant apartments too, so there was money to be made. 2 had been empty for less than 6 months, but one apartment had been unlived in for much longer, and that was apartment 401. I found this strange because 401 was a corner apartment and should have gotten some good sunlight. I went to check out the building. 401 seemed to be the oldest looking apartment. It was really dated compared to the other 2 apartments. It hadn't been renovated, and I didn't know why. I guess since the building owner was selling up, he must have had some money issues and never got round to updating that one apartment. 401 was a pretty standard looking single apartment. The window was to the right, and the veranda was at the back. It had a small chest of drawers, a closet, 2 TVs, and various storage boxes. In the walk-in wardrobe, there was some bedding and a whole bunch of small items. Frankly, it was a bit of a mess in there. It looked as if someone left in a hurry. So I was in 401, trying to tidy it up. I was throwing things out. I wouldn't usually be cleaning up alone, but I was eager to get some photos of the dimensions and current state of the place. I'm a person who never really picks up on any kind of vibes. I've never had a paranormal encounter or anything like that, but when I was in that room, I felt as if someone was watching me. I tried to ignore it, but as evening slowly grew into night, I couldn't escape that feeling. I felt so uncomfortable when I suddenly smelled the scent of something unusual. It was as if I had just walked into someone else's house. You know, like each house gives off a certain kind of smell or scent perhaps. It was like that, the scent of life in a long, dormant shell of a home. It was chilling. There was a full-length mirror hanging from the wall, and I found myself constantly looking up at it. The mirror was attached to the wall, and it seemed as if it would take some doing to get it off. I didn't want to look at the mirror anymore, so I shifted and faced away from it while I continued working. After things were slightly tidied up, I measured for a floor plan, and I snapped a few photos, and I headed back to the office. I decided to get in touch with a firm we use for renovations and ask for a contractor to take a look at the photos I took. A few days later, I got a call from the renovation company, and we got them to give 401 a fresh look. During the first day of work taking place, I got a call from the renovators, and it went a little like this. Hi. It's kind of hard to describe, but there's something in this apartment. What are you talking about? What? Wood rot? No, it's not that. It's just me and the contractor are now in the apartment, and it's, well, actually, you better probably come down here if you can. Well, I headed down there to see what all the fuss was about, and the 2 renovators led me to the full-length mirror. Would you mind taking a look behind the mirror? We've pried it away from the wall and, thought you should see this. I looked back there. It was black with soot, but I could see something else. All these strange religious talismans and cryptic symbols. Something wasn't right there. In my line of work, you have to expect unpleasant surprises from residents, accidents, pretty much anything can happen. But when you see something like that, some kind of religious or cult stuff, well, for me, it just plain spooks me out. In addition to these weird things being found behind the mirror, one of the renovators complained of having a splitting headache and he had to go home. I asked the other guy what he thought of the place and if he was alright. He said to me, "Off the record, I've been on plenty of jobs, but none have weirded me out as much as this one. Something about that mirror, man. I don't like it, and I don't scare too easy." Well, we pushed on with the renovations. Actually, I had a Buddhist friend come and purify the place, just in case. When the renovations were complete, the search for a tenant quickly began. After about a month, a suitable tenant was found. I set the rent a little lower to entice someone in. The tenant was a woman in her 50s, a great candidate. She had been hospitalized for some time and she needed a place to recuperate, so I figured she was ideal. I'll put it another way, I wasn't worried about noise complaints. She was very pleasant and soft-spoken. Things seemed fine, and after a while I kind of forgot about apartment 401, but about a week or so after her move-in day, I got a noise complaint call from apartment 402. The resident said that the woman in apartment 401 was screaming at night, incomprehensible words while hitting the walls and throwing things around. I couldn't really believe that could be true, so I decided to stop by and ask some of the tenants on her floor how things were going, just in case they wanted to mention anything. They didn't need much encouragement. They told me all about their new neighbor. They said that she would burst out of her apartment and into the hallway at night. One told me some of the phrases she heard her shouting as she passed through the hall. "The man is watching me from the ceiling, through the gaps in the ceiling. Someone keeps bringing home women at night. This guy's either horny all the time or I'm living in a goddamn red light district. He's not gonna coerce me. He's not gonna coerce me, no." From what I heard that day, the police had been out several times too because she had been shouting this kind of nonsense from the veranda late at night. I knocked on the door of apartment 401. The tenant answered the door. To me, she looked entirely different. She had a discerning glare as she opened the door, completely eagle-eyed. She started the conversation with, "I can't sleep at night. Someone's watching me from the ceiling. It's like I'm under constant surveillance. Someone is watching me from dusk till dawn." I went inside to see what she was talking about, and there was a hole in the ceiling of about 30 centimeters. I couldn't be certain that she made the hole, or if indeed some other mysterious voyeur did. I decided to offer her out of her tenancy lease, for the good of the building, an offer she happily and readily accepted. I had to consider her welfare since she hadn't long been discharged from hospital. After she moved out, I hired the same contractor to help repair that hole in the ceiling. I got a call from him shortly after he arrived at the apartment. He said that he had found more of those strange pieces of paper with symbols up there. I said to him, "Just fix the hole for now, and I'll take a look at the other stuff later." I told myself that the incident with the former tenant was just a one-off. I mean, she did just come out of the hospital. The next tenant was a guy. He was in his late 20s. He had a decent job and his parents signed on as guarantors, so everything seemed fine for me. He looked like a decent enough chap too. I greeted him and his dad on moving day and they seemed perfectly pleasant. 3 months or so went by and I got a call from my new tenant's dad asking if I had heard from his son. I said that I hadn't, and he told me that he hasn't been able to get in touch with his son for about a week. He wanted me to go to 401 with the keys to do a welfare check with him right away. I realized that the rent hadn't been paid as well. Both his parents arrived and informed me that their son had been missing from work without notice too. I started to get worried and began to think the worst. We arrived at 401 and I pressed the doorbell. Unsurprisingly, there was no response. I then opened the door with the duplicate key we retained. I pushed open the door, but it snapped against the chain. It was open enough to pour out a horrendous smell though. The stench was so terrible that it caused me to almost throw up in front of the parents. I covered my mouth and tried to look in through the door. It was pitch black in there, but I could make out the shape of what I thought was a garbage bag. I called out the tenant's name. No reply. His mother called out. I could hear the sense of pain and worry in her voice. No reply. I realized during the intervals we expected a response to come in that I could faintly hear the sound of the TV inside the room. I told his frightened parents that I had a chain-cutting tool in my car and I would go and get it. I came back and I told them that I was happy to enter the room ahead of them. I was still thinking the worst and I cannot imagine the pain it would have caused them to see their lifeless son in that apartment. I cut the chain and I headed in. It was dark in there, and there was garbage all over the place. I tried the lights, but they didn't come on. The main room was almost completely dark except for the TV. I called out once again while looking around the room. Then my eyes fell on him. He was there, sat at the edge of his bed, with the duvet wrapped around him. I shouted out in shock, and his parents came rushing in. They called out to him, asking if he was okay, but he didn't respond. He just hung his head. His hair was long, and he hadn't shaved. He looked almost unrecognizable to the person who moved in 3 months ago. I looked up at the ceiling. With the help of the glow of the TV, I noticed that there were black garbage bags taped to the ceiling. I opened the curtains to see that he had done the same to the windows and the veranda doors too. This was very unusual, and it was freaking me out. I called an ambulance and went about removing the bags, as they could be a hazard. The ambulance arrived, and the parents and the son all went off to the hospital. I think they were all crying by the time they left. A few days later, the tenant's mum came and told me that they were taking their son back to the countryside to recuperate. She said that she wanted to cancel the contract for apartment 401. And who was I to say no to that? I mean, I could have dug my heels in, but I like to think I have a little more decency than that. I wanted to ask how he was doing, but I just didn't feel it was right to pry. It's been about 2 years since he moved out, and we aren't offering that apartment out to tenants at the moment. To be honest, I would be happy if no one lived in there ever again. We've had a lot of questions by the police, acquaintances, etc. It seems as if apartment 401 has earned itself a little infamy. Even the residents in the building won't go near it. One last thing. On the day I went to take the photos of the place, I found one photo on my digital camera that I don't remember taking. The camera is just pointing towards the ceiling, towards the part where the hole was made. I want to know about the history of that building and that apartment because the first resident's comments intrigued me. What I thought at the time was incoherent babble might hold some clues to the mystery of apartment 401. Especially the comment about the man bringing back women to the room and her saying that he was going to coerce her. I wonder what she was referring to. I wonder what stories the mirror and the walls would tell if they could. I have had some horrible experiences in the past. I want to share these with you. It all happened about 2 years ago. I got a job and moved out from my family home. One night I was walking home from the station as usual, after work. It wasn't a long walk. It only took about 5 minutes in total. I was heading home that night and I felt something was out of place. I felt as if someone was following me. I turned around but I didn't see anyone. I thought that I was just being paranoid or something, but this odd feeling lasted about a week. Every time I was heading home after work from the station, I felt as if I wasn't alone. It bothered me so much that I spoke to a work colleague about it, and he told me, "If you're worried or scared about what's happening, then why don't you talk to the police?" I didn't think I had anything to go on. I mean, what would they do about it if I told them that I thought I was being followed? I tried not to think about it, but then one night something happened, and my paranoia was justified. I got a letter at work. It was addressed to me. I opened it and shrieked. It said, "I'm always watching you." I showed it to my boss, but he didn't really care. He wasn't interested at all, to be honest. It really scared me. I didn't know if it was a prank because I had told some of my colleagues about my fears. I thought that would be the worst thing that would happen, but I was proven wrong. One time I got a call from a private number. I picked it up and a male voice said, "Are you just getting in? Little earlier than usual tonight, huh?" I was really scared and full of anxiety, but somehow I managed to muster up the courage to ask, in what I guess was a very shaky voice, "Who are you?" Knowing full well that this was likely the person who had been following me and who had sent that creepy letter to my workplace. "You're the guy who's following me." To which he replied something along the lines of, "Oh, you noticed. What a sharp sense of intuition you have. I'm actually surprised." I said, "I'll call the police." "That doesn't matter," he replied instantly. I felt my spirit sinking in my chest like a lead weight, so I hung up. I spent that night awake late, thinking that there was nothing I could do about the situation. I felt so helpless. I barely slept, but I did come out of the situation thinking that it wasn't completely helpless by the morning. I figured that whoever was stalking me knew my work and train schedule, so I decided to go to work by car. It was a little more inconvenient, but after that call, I didn't feel safe sat opposite a stranger on the train. I was still scared though. I still talked to my coworkers about what was going on. For a long while there was nothing. I figured that the stalker must have just given up and lost interest. My fears returned when I opened a letter one night after work. The letter hadn't been addressed. It was hand-delivered. I knew the sender before I read a single word. But this is what it said. "Yesterday a friend came over and you and her talked about me. I'm so glad you care about me and that I'm a part of your life." Throughout the letter it spoke of the contents of my friend and I's conversation. It was horrible. It was like someone knew your inner thoughts, you know? I thought about it for a long while, and the most logical conclusion that I came to was that someone had somehow hidden a listening device in my home. If that was true, and I felt like it was 1,000% true at the time, it must mean that someone had gotten into my apartment. Some stranger must have gotten in. If you ever suspect that this might have happened to you, you will know how that realization makes you feel so incredibly violated. I sat there thinking, whoa, I must have had a bunch of friends and co-workers over, not to mention the previous tenant that lived here, and anyone they had brought in. I had no idea who the culprit was. I have had mostly women over since I am a woman, but come to think of it, I've had a mix of guys and girls over for a drinking party once. Co-workers. Some other guys have been here too. Some other friends also. I had no idea if any of them was shady or capable of becoming a stalker. I couldn't figure out who the guy harassing me was, and I also couldn't move out. I just didn't have the money, and I didn't want a couple of weird letters and calls to give me a reason to leave the apartment that I really loved. I mean, what's the alternative? Go back home? Live with mum and dad? They weren't exactly local. Talking about my parents will send me down a whole nother rabbit hole. On top of that, I couldn't move even if I wanted to. Things quietened down after that, like it did before. And I just kind of thought, or maybe hoped is the operative word here, that the stalker had moved on. I think about 3 months went by incidents-free. I had returned to my usual work-life rhythm. My confidence was back. I carried on like nothing had happened. Things were all good for a while, until I came to a realization. I was missing something from my bedroom. Underwear. I was missing some underwear. At first I thought all the usual thoughts like, oh, did I lose that? I could understand me losing one article of underwear, like a bra or some panties or something, you know, that kind of stuff happens to everyone, right? But 3? That's pretty weird, isn't it? I live on the 2nd floor of an apartment block. I never dried my clothes outside on the balcony. Therefore, for them to go missing meant that they must have been removed from my apartment. I thought that something very strange was going on. It was terrifying. I returned one night to find a memo attached to the fridge. It was just your run-of-the-mill post-it note, actually. Occasionally my mum would come over and leave me something in the fridge, so I thought that it was just my mum looking out for me, maybe. I took one look at the post-it without reading its full contents, and that told me it wasn't written by my mother. No one in my family, actually. The post-it read, "Have you noticed that your underwear is missing? I guess you wonder where it's gone. Well, I have it." I was scared, like to the point in which you don't know what to do. I was being terrorized, and I was scared. That is the plainest way I can say it. I called the police. I must have sounded so odd. I must have sounded so dumb, but I told them everything. They were not the most helpful people to contact in that situation. I mean, they listened, but they would always try to talk me back round to a message, and that message was, just move, it'll be easier for everyone if you just move apartments. That seemed to be the message coming out of my colleagues and friends too, but once again, I have to say I couldn't afford it. I mean, I guess that this is great advice for someone who could afford it, but I just couldn't. I hatched a genius plan after this. I figured that if I replaced the locks on my door, then the trouble would end. I mean, replacing locks seemed a lot cheaper and a lot less hassle than moving. I felt like it worked though. I even left a pile of underwear freshly laundered on my coffee table for about a week or so, and they remained untouched. To be honest, it was a temporary fix. I mean, I couldn't really live there anymore. I was a little reluctant at the time to admit that. I guess it was down to it being the first place I ever lived alone in. I was unwilling to give it up. I couldn't afford to move and I didn't want to be home alone at night, so I decided to solve both problems by getting a night shift job. I did it on the hush-hush. I wanted cash in hand, and if my day job knew I was moonlighting, I might have been in trouble. I know. Their sympathy for me and my situation is truly heartwarming, isn't it? I didn't care. My new part-time job kept me out the house at night, and it helped me to save up. I decided to use some of the money I had saved to get some security cameras, or surveillance cameras. I don't know which is the right terminology. I thought that if I found out who was stalking me, I could show the evidence to the police and I could stop it all and maybe I wouldn't have to move. In Japan, honestly, stalking laws are lax. They won't do much until something, quote, happens. If they weren't going to help me, I figured that I might as well try to help myself. Right? I was really scared, I should say. I hated it. I hated that I had to work 2 jobs and be stressed all day and night. I was afraid of every guy that passed me on the street, and the ones who politely smiled scared me the most. It wasn't their fault though. Scared but working. That's how I would describe that period of my life. Things got a little better when a friend of mine reached out to me. He met me at work for lunch. We were close friends back in the starts of our careers. We both joined the company at about the same time, so we went through training together, and we were close friends back at the start. It was great to see him again, actually. He was really sweet and he listened to my complaints and troubles and tried to offer his own kind of advice. He was such a nice guy during that tough time that I just ended up relying on him whenever I was down or upset. After changing the locks, I felt as if I was free again. Nothing happened for the longest time. And then about half a year after the lock change, something happened. I had to leave my job due to family reasons. I was disappointed to be quitting. I guess for some, it looked as if I was throwing in the towel or something. It certainly felt that way at times, but in all honesty, it was out of my control. If I wanted to leave due to pressure or circumstances out of my control, like, being stalked, then that's fine. Well, anyways, since I had to move back home, I guess I had to break the news to everyone. I had a farewell party at work and I broke the news to the guy who had helped me through the tough times. So I went back to my hometown and settled back in. After a little while, he messaged me and he said something like, "Hey, it's been a while. How are you doing?" We chatted for a bit and he invited me to meet him somewhere close by and I accepted. The guy who had been good to me got in touch and offered to come see me. I felt great about it, actually. It was like someone from a life I had once before coming back to save me from my current life at home. I guess that doesn't make sense unless you're me. Being back home was rough, and I guess that I was feeling nostalgic. Nostalgic for freedom. I had a new job though. Things were going pretty well. In fact, he wanted to meet me near a park, close to my workplace. When we met, we walked around the park a couple of times. We talked about work and life and a couple of memories. I told him how I quit my job, stuff like that, and he seemed happy that I was doing well. I wanted to get across that I was in a much better place and genuinely a little happier than I thought I would have been to move back home. But then he said something strange. "I guess you don't care about my feelings then, huh? That's really insensitive, you know." I didn't really understand what he was talking about and where it was coming from. I wondered if I had accidentally said something rude to him or took his sympathetic ear for granted, so I replied, "Oh, no, yeah, I am sorry. I guess I shouldn't have unloaded all that trauma on you during those rough days. I thought you didn't mind, though. Did you not want to hear all that stuff?" And he replied as quick as a flash, "Yeah, I hate that stuff." It went super quiet, and there was an atmosphere after he said that. I didn't feel like talking to him anymore. He suddenly leaned over towards me and covered my mouth with his hand. I was so scared and shocked by his actions, I literally couldn't breathe. As soon as he did that, I knew that this guy was the guy who had been stalking me, and I began to tremble. Even though I felt as if I couldn't speak, I managed to utter a few words to the effect of, "You followed me. You were in my apartment." "Oh, good for you. Huh? She finally notices. God, never knew you were this insensitive." "Thought we were friends. I didn't know," I said. "Well, we're very different people, aren't we? I wanted you to be mine and fast. I tried to show you my intentions for months, but oh no. Here I am again, ending up as the goddamn friend, a role I have played before. I mean, God, how stupid are you? Can't you read the signs?" I was shaking like a leaf. He had one hand over my mouth and one clamped on my shoulder. "Why did you quit work anyway? What the hell was that about? Had you been a little more mindful, a little more aware of your surroundings, you might have noticed me sooner." I stuttered some kind of muffled reply and he cut me off. "If you can't have the foresight to think of others, then why should they care about all of your troubles?" I had only known his gentle and kind side before that day. I didn't know he was capable of such a blatant display of anger. I could never have imagined that he would flip out like that. I struggled and tried to break away from him, but he was too strong. He scared the living hell out of me with what he said next. Listen, relax. I don't want you to be mine in a place like this, but if you keep behaving like you are and you keep resisting, then I'll do it here." The park was positively empty. He must have known, but it wasn't a popular one. I felt as if we were the only two people in there, just when things looked their bleakest, and I thought that I could see a look of dark contemplation dance across his face. I saw something else, or should I say, someone else. A dog walker entered the park. I believe that this was highly unexpected for him. So he let go of me for a split second, to appear normal, I guess. I wriggled free from his grasp. I looked towards the dog walker. I wanted to plead with her with my eyes, to show her that I wasn't here by choice anymore. When I locked eyes with the dog walker, I realized that I recognized those eyes. I knew her. She was an ex-coworker. She rushed over to me. Her dog was with her. It wasn't a small dog. The creep started fast walking towards the exit of the park, and I was left hyperventilating in her arms. I think that the only word I could muster was, "Why?" And she replied, "I thought that he was following you." She told me later that he made no secret that he liked me. He told numerous people at work that he had a crush on me. It felt like I was the only one who didn't know this. When all this stuff started happening to me at work, people naturally looked his way. He quit the company right before the locks got changed. I didn't know he quit because I barely knew this guy existed until he came in when I was at my lowest. Apart from when I met him at the start of working at that company, I didn't really see him at work. He was a little older than me. He was told by someone at work if anything happened to me or my place, then the police would be called. That's when he left, I guess. That was when things went quiet for me too. It all started to make sense. So, when my ex-coworker miraculously saw this guy heading in the direction of my parents' home, she decided to follow him. And thank God she did. After everything went down, I managed to move out of my parents' house and got myself my own place. I think the company I worked for is still operating. I'm miles and miles and miles away now, though. It was a horrible time for me. I didn't ever go back to that secluded park again near my old job. To think how close I came to having something so irreversibly horrible being done to me is something that terrifies me on a daily basis.